For 12 years, Evelyn trusted the pastor who buried her husband, prayed with her, and promised to protect her. Then one midnight phone call led her to a secret folder inside his office, and a letter from her dead husband that she was never supposed to see. For 12 years, Evelyn Brooks trusted Pastor Matthew with the most fragile parts of her life. He was there when her husband, James, was diagnosed with cancer. He sat beside Evelyn in the hospital waiting room when doctors stopped talking about treatment and started talking about comfort. And on the morning James died, Pastor Matthew was one of the first people Evelyn called. At the funeral, he stood behind the pulpit and spoke about James as though they had been brothers. James Brooks was a faithful man, he told the congregation. And as long as this church stands, Evelyn will never walk alone. Believed every word. She was 57 when she buried her husband. After 31 years of marriage, she suddenly had to learn how to eat dinner alone, sleep in an empty bed, and wake up without hearing James moving around the kitchen. Prayer became the one thing holding her together. Every morning before sunrise, Evelyn sat in James's old chair with her Bible across her lap. "Lord, help me make it through today." Some mornings, that was all she could say. Pastor Matthew checked on her constantly. He called after Sunday services. Members of the church brought meals. And when Evelyn couldn't bring herself to attend Bible study, Pastor Matthew reminded her that grief should never separate her from God. Slowly, Evelyn returned. Months later, the life insurance payment James had arranged finally arrived. It wasn't enough to make Evelyn wealthy, but it gave her security. James had spent years making sure that if anything happened to him, his wife wouldn't struggle. Evelyn wanted part of that money to honor his memory. That was when Pastor Matthew told her about the church's Widows and Families Relief Ministry. He explained that several women in the congregation were behind on rent. One mother was supposedly facing eviction. Another widow needed help paying for medication. Evelyn didn't hesitate. "If James were here," she said, "he would want us to help." Her first donation was 10,000 months dollars later. She gave again. Pastor Matthew thanked her privately. "You have no idea how many lives you're changing." Evelyn smiled. She didn't want recognition. She didn't want her name announced from the pulpit. She simply wanted something good to grow out of her grief. For almost a year, she believed that was exactly what was happening, until one Wednesday evening. After Bible study, Evelyn noticed an elderly widow named Mrs. Clara Jenkins sitting alone outside the church. Clara was 72. Her photograph had appeared on the ministry's fundraising board several months earlier. Evelyn remembered it clearly because Pastor Matthew had said Clara was struggling after falling behind on her rent. Evelyn walked over. "Are you all right?" Clara tried to smile, then her eyes filled with tears. "Landlord gave me until Friday." Evelyn froze. "Until Friday for what?" "To pay what I owe or leave." Stared at her. "But the church helped you." Looked confused. "Helped me." "The widow's fund." Clara's expression changed. "What widow's fund?" A cold feeling moved through Evelyn's chest. She tried to convince herself there was an explanation. Perhaps the payment hadn't been processed. Perhaps Clara misunderstood. Perhaps Pastor Matthew was still arranging everything. The following morning, Evelyn called him. He listened quietly before giving a soft laugh. "Sister Evelyn, these things take time. Clara says she hasn't received anything." "Our procedures." Evelyn hesitated. "How much has she received so far?" Silence. Only for a second. But Evelyn noticed it. Then Pastor Matthew's voice became unusually firm. "Evelyn, you have always been a woman of faith. Don't allow suspicion to plant something ugly in your heart." The words embarrassed her. She apologized. That Sunday, Pastor Matthew preached about trusting spiritual leadership. Evelyn sat in the third row feeling as though every sentence was directed at her, so she decided to forget about it. But then another woman approached her. Then another. 3 families whose photographs had been used during church fundraising campaigns told Evelyn essentially the same thing. They had received little money. Some had received nothing. Yet Evelyn knew how much people were giving. She had personally donated thousands. Where was the money going? That question followed her home. That night, Evelyn sat in James's chair and opened her Bible, but she couldn't read. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider something she desperately didn't want to believe. What if Pastor Matthew was lying? Immediately she felt guilty. This was the man who had prayed beside her husband's hospital bed, the man who buried James, the man who had helped her survive the darkest year of her life. Evelyn closed her Bible. Then she bowed her head. Lord, forgive me if I'm wrong. Her voice trembled. If I'm judging this man unfairly, correct me. She paused. But if something is being hidden in your house, filled her eyes, show me. Evelyn didn't ask God to embarrass anyone. She didn't ask for revenge. She asked for truth. For the next 2 weeks, nothing happened. Pastor Matthew continued preaching. The choir continued singing. People continued dropping envelopes into the offering baskets. Evelyn began wondering whether she had allowed grief to make her suspicious. Then at 12:17 a.m. on a Thursday, her phone rang. Evelyn woke suddenly. She looked at the screen. It was Margaret Ellis, the church secretary. Margaret had worked in the church office for almost 20 years. Evelyn answered, "Margaret." There was no response, only breathing. Then Evelyn heard crying. "Margaret, what's wrong?" the woman finally whispered. "Evelyn, I need you to come to the church." Evelyn sat upright. "Now, yes," happened. Another silence. Then Margaret said something that made Evelyn's heart begin pounding. "I found something Pastor Matthew was supposed to destroy." Gripped the phone. "What?" "I can't tell you over the phone." 25 minutes later, Evelyn pulled into the church parking lot. Only one light was on. The pastor's office. Margaret was waiting beside the side entrance. Her hands were trembling. Without explaining anything, she led Evelyn down the dark hallway. When they entered Pastor Matthew's office, several boxes were sitting on the floor. Old bank statements, donation records, receipts, files. Margaret pointed toward one box. "I was told to shred these tomorrow morning." Evelyn slowly approached it. Then she saw a familiar name written across an old folder. James Brooks, her husband's name. Evelyn stopped breathing. "Why does Pastor Matthew have a file on my husband?" Margaret began crying again. "I think you need to open it." Reached down with shaking hands. Inside were financial statements, handwritten notes, and copies of church records. Then she found an envelope. The handwriting on the front made her knees weak. She knew that handwriting. She had seen it on birthday cards, anniversary notes, grocery lists, love letters for 31 years. It was James's handwriting. Written across the envelope were 4 words, for my wife, Evelyn. Her husband had written her a letter before he died. And somehow, for 12 years, it had been hidden inside Pastor Matthew's office. Evelyn looked at Margaret. "Why did he have this?" Margaret shook her head. "I don't know." Slowly opened the envelope. The first sentence was enough to make her cover her mouth. "Evelyn, if you are reading this, then I was right not to trust him." Evelyn's eyes moved toward Pastor Matthew's empty chair. Suddenly, the missing donations didn't feel like the beginning of the secret. They felt like the end of something that had started long before her husband died. And for the first time since James's funeral, Evelyn wondered whether the pastor who had stood beside his coffin had known exactly what James was trying to expose. Evelyn's hands trembled as she stared at the letter. For several seconds she couldn't bring herself to continue reading. James had been dead for 12 years. 12 years of birthdays without him. 12 Christmas mornings with an empty chair at the table. 12 anniversaries when Evelyn still reached for his photograph and remembered the man who had promised they would grow old together. And all that time, his final words to her had been sitting inside Pastor Matthew's office. Margaret pulled a chair closer. "Evelyn, sit down." Barely heard her. Her eyes remained fixed on James's handwriting. She finally continued. "Evelyn, if you are reading this, then I was right not to trust him. There are things happening with the church finances that I cannot explain. I have asked Matthew questions, but every answer creates another question." Evelyn stopped. She looked toward the pastor's empty chair. James had called him Matthew, not Pastor Matthew. That alone told Evelyn something. Her husband had written this letter as a man speaking about another man he no longer trusted. She kept reading. James explained that almost 13 years earlier, he had volunteered to help review the church's financial records after the previous treasurer became ill. At first, everything appeared normal. Offerings came in, bills were paid, mission funds were distributed. But then James noticed a payment, $8,400. It had been recorded as emergency housing assistance for 3 families. James knew 2 of those families personally. so he asked them whether the church had helped them. Neither family knew what he was talking about. Evelyn's stomach tightened. It was exactly what was happening now, different families, different year, same pattern. James had noticed it 12 years before she did. She continued reading. I asked Matthew where the money went. He told me there had been a bookkeeping error and promised to correct it. James had initially believed him. Then he found another payment, $12,700. This one was listed as medical assistance. Then another $6,300, then another small enough not to attract immediate attention, large enough to become substantial when added together. James started making copies. Evelyn immediately looked toward the boxes surrounding her. Margaret looked up. These records, Evelyn swallowed. James collected them. Margaret's face changed. Evelyn began searching through the box. There were photocopies of checks, old bank statements, handwritten calculations, dates, names. James had circled certain transactions in red ink. Evelyn recognized that too. Whenever James balanced their household accounts, he used a red pen for anything that didn't make sense. She ran her finger across one of the circles. It felt as though her husband were sitting beside her again. But then she found something that made her stop. A transfer for $15,000. The dollar's receiving account wasn't listed under the church. It belonged to an organization called New Covenant Community Outreach. Have you ever heard of this? Evelyn asked. Margaret shook her head. No. It one of our ministries. Not that I remember. Evelyn searched through another stack. There it was again. New Covenant Community Outreach, $9,000, $11,500, $7,200. Money had repeatedly left the church and gone to the same organization. Evelyn looked at Margaret. Who owns this? I don't know. They continued searching. Nearly 40 minutes passed. Then Margaret found an old registration document folded between two financial statements. She unfolded it. Her face went pale. Evelyn. What? Margaret handed it to her. New Covenant Community Outreach had been registered using an address Evelyn recognized. She stared at it. That was Pastor Matthew's old house. Nodded slowly. Neither woman spoke. Evelyn returned to James's letter. Her husband had discovered the same connection. I confronted Matthew again. This time he became angry. He told me I was creating problems where none existed. He reminded me how much this church had done for our family. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. For the first time, Evelyn understood what the woman had risked by calling her. She reached for Margaret's hand. You don't have to do this alone. Gave a nervous laugh. That's what he always tells people. Understood immediately. The same words, different meaning. They began photographing everything they could. Bank statements, transfers, donation records, James's notes, the registration documents for New Covenant Community Outreach. Evelyn photographed every page of her husband's letter. Then she placed the original back inside its envelope, but she didn't return it to the box. She slipped it into her handbag. That belongs to me. Didn't argue. At 2:43 a.m. they left the church through the side entrance. Evelyn drove home in silence. She didn't sleep. At 7:30 that morning, she sat at her kitchen table with James's letter beside her Bible. She stared at Thomas Reed's phone number. Then she called once, twice, 3 times. A man answered. Reed Accounting. Evelyn couldn't speak for a moment. Hello, Mr. Reed. Yes, my name is Evelyn Brooks. Silence, complete silence. Then the man's breathing changed. James's wife. Evelyn gripped the phone. Long pause, then Thomas said something she wasn't prepared for. I've been waiting 12 years for you to call me. Evelyn's heart began pounding. You knew about the letter. I gave it to someone to deliver to you. Who? Thomas didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy. Evelyn, before I tell you anything, I need to ask you a question. Matthew still the pastor? Yes. Exhaled slowly. Thomas exhaled slowly. Then you need to understand something before you confront him. Waited. Thomas lowered his voice. The money James discovered wasn't the reason I left that church. Evelyn's grip tightened around the phone. Then what was? Thomas answered. Because James and I discovered who else was helping Matthew move it. Went completely still. Who? Thomas hesitated and then said, someone you still trust. Evelyn didn't sleep that night. After the phone call with Thomas Reed ended, she remained sitting at her kitchen table long after the sun had risen. James's letter was still beside her. The Bible was still open. The coffee she poured hours earlier had gone cold, but Evelyn barely noticed. Her mind kept returning to the same sentence. Someone you still trust. Those 5 words followed her everywhere. She trusted many people, her neighbors, her church family, the women she prayed with every week. People who had stood beside her during the hardest moments of her life. But one person kept coming back to her mind. Someone who had been there almost every time Pastor Matthew was involved. Someone who always defended him. Someone who always knew what was happening inside the church. Evelyn shook her head. No. She whispered it out loud. She didn't want to believe it, because the person she was thinking about was not just a church member, she was family. Her name was Linda Carter. Linda had been Evelyn's closest friend for more than 20 years. They met at church when their children were still young. They prayed together. They celebrated holidays together. They sat beside each other during Sunday services. When James became sick, Linda was one of the few people who visited Evelyn every week. She brought meals. She helped with hospital appointments. She cried with Evelyn when the doctors gave them difficult news. Linda wasn't just someone Evelyn trusted. She was someone Evelyn considered a sister. But there was one thing Evelyn had never forgotten. After James died, Linda was the person who encouraged her to stop asking questions about the church finances. You need peace, Evelyn, Linda had told her. Carry things that God didn't ask you to carry. The time Evelyn thought Linda was protecting her, now, for the first time, those words sounded different. Evelyn picked up her phone. She stared at Linda's name. She wanted to call. She wanted to ask. But she couldn't, not yet, because accusations could destroy a person's reputation. And Evelyn had spent her entire life trying to do what was right. She didn't want suspicion. She wanted truth. So instead, she called Thomas again. He answered after the second ring. Evelyn. His voice sounded as though he had been expecting her. I need you to tell me everything. Was silent, then he sighed. I was hoping you would say that. Who was helping Matthew? Another pause. Evelyn, before I tell you, you need to understand something. Wasn't operating alone. She closed her eyes. I already know that. No, you don't. Thomas's voice became heavier. The person helping him wasn't someone who benefited from the money. Evelyn frowned. What does that mean? It means they helped him hide things. They believed they were protecting the church. Evelyn sat back. That wasn't what she expected. Someone thought they were doing the right thing? Yes, Thomas continued. That made it more dangerous. Looked toward James's photograph on the table. Who was it? Thomas finally answered. Linda Carter. The room became silent. Evelyn felt as though all the air had disappeared. No, I know what you're thinking. You don't know anything. Evelyn, no, her voice cracked. You're talking about my friend. Didn't argue. I know. She was there when James was dying. I know. She helped me survive after his death. I know. Then why would she do this? Thomas's answer was quiet. Because sometimes people don't have to hate you to betray you. Said nothing. They convince themselves they're protecting something bigger. The words hurt more because they made sense. Evelyn remembered Linda sitting in the church office with Pastor Matthew. She remembered Linda defending him whenever someone questioned his decisions. She remembered how quickly Linda changed the subject whenever finances were discussed. Things she had ignored before suddenly looked different. Thomas continued. James found out Linda had been signing documents. Signing what? Approval forms. For what? Transfers. Evelyn's hand moved to her mouth. How many? I don't know. Thomas. I don't know the exact number. James was still investigating. Stood and began walking around the kitchen. Didn't you tell me 12 years ago? Thomas became quiet. Finally he answered, because I tried. Evelyn stopped. What? I tried to get the letter to you, but I never received it. I know. Stopped you. Thomas hesitated. Then Matthew. Evelyn closed her eyes. How? After James died, Matthew told me the family needed time to grieve. He said you were too fragile and that the letter contained accusations that could destroy your faith. Felt tears forming. He said that? Yes. And you believed him? No. Thomas's answer came quickly. I didn't. Then why didn't you come to me? Because by then I had already lost my position. People believed I stole money from the church. Evelyn remembered the former treasurer everyone stopped talking about, the man whose name had been erased from church history. I was trying to survive, Thomas continued, and James knew that. Do you mean? James visited me 1 week before he went back into the hospital. Evelyn froze. He visited you? Yes. What did he say? Thomas took a breath. He told me if anything happened to him, you needed to know the truth. Evelyn sat down slowly. He knew. Yes, he knew he might not survive. Didn't answer. And that silence hurt more than words. Evelyn looked down at James's letter. For 12 years she thought her husband had left this world peacefully. Now she wondered how much fear he carried alone. That afternoon, Evelyn drove to Linda's house. She didn't know why. Maybe she needed to see her face. Maybe she needed to know whether the woman she loved could really hide something like this. Linda opened the door with a smile. Evelyn. Then she noticed her expression. The smile disappeared. What happened? Evelyn looked at the woman standing in front of her, the woman who held her while she cried, the woman who prayed beside her, the woman who might have helped hide the truth. I need to ask you something. Linda stepped aside. Come in. Evelyn entered. They sat in silence. Then Evelyn placed a copy of James's letter on the table. Linda looked at it, and immediately her face changed. Not confusion, not surprise, fear. Evelyn noticed. You know what this is? Linda looked away. Evelyn, no, her voice trembled. I need the truth. Linda's eyes filled with tears. I never wanted you to find out this way. Felt her heart sink. Find out what? Linda looked toward the window, then whispered. James was right about Matthew. Evelyn stopped breathing. But he was wrong about one thing. Looked back at her. I wasn't helping him steal money. A tear rolled down her cheek. I was helping him hide something much worse. Stared at her. What could be worse than stealing from people who trusted you? Linda's voice dropped. Because the money wasn't the only thing Matthew was hiding. Evelyn leaned forward. What else? Linda reached into a drawer. She pulled out an old envelope and placed it on the table. Evelyn recognized the handwriting immediately. It was James's, but this envelope was different because it was addressed to someone else. For Linda Carter. Linda whispered, James left this for me too. Evelyn stared at the envelope. Her husband's secrets had not ended with one letter. There were more. And somehow, after 12 years, they were all leading back to the same man, Pastor Matthew. Evelyn stared at the envelope sitting between them. For Linda Carter. 4 words felt heavier than anything she had discovered so far. For 12 years, Evelyn believed she knew the story of her husband's final days. James became sick. James fought. James lost his battle. That was the painful truth she had accepted. But now she was beginning to understand something. James had not only been fighting an illness, he had been carrying a secret. And he had been trying to protect people from something he believed was wrong. Evelyn looked at Linda. How long have you had this? Linda lowered her eyes. Since before James died. Felt her heart sink. Before, Linda nodded slowly. He gave it to me himself. The room became silent. You saw James? Linda wiped away a tear. Yes. When? 3 days before he went back to the hospital. Evelyn's hands tightened around the edge of the table. He came to my house. Why? Linda looked at the envelope. Because he knew he might not get another chance. Looked away. That sentence hurt more than she expected. James knew. He knew his time might be running out. And while she was focused on doctor's appointments, medication schedules, and trying to stay strong for him, he was trying to make sure the truth survived. Why didn't you tell me? Evelyn asked. Linda closed her eyes. I wanted to. Then why didn't you? Because I was afraid. Looked at her. Afraid of what? Linda took a deep breath. Losing everything. Evelyn shook her head. You mean losing the church? Linda didn't answer, and that silence told Evelyn enough. Linda, her friend's eyes filled with tears. I spent 20 years building my life around that church. So did I. I know. No, you don't. Evelyn's voice cracked. You were not just my friend. You were the person I trusted when I lost my husband. Linda looked down. I know. All this time you knew James had discovered something. I knew he was worried. That's not what I asked. Linda finally looked up. A tear rolled down her cheek. I knew. The confession sat between them. Evelyn felt betrayed all over again, not by a stranger. Not by someone who never cared about her, but by someone who held her while she cried. Open the letter, Evelyn whispered. Linda hesitated. I don't know if you should. Once you know what's inside, you can't go back. Looked at James's envelope. She thought about the last 12 years, the unanswered questions, the missing letter, the things that never made sense. I lost my husband 12 years ago. Her voice became steady. I think I can handle the truth. Linda slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single page. Unlike Evelyn's letter, this one was shorter. But the handwriting was unmistakable. James had written, Linda, if you are reading this, then Evelyn knows something is wrong. I need you to understand something. Matthew is not the only person responsible, but he is the person with the most power to stop this. The money is only the beginning. The real danger is what he is willing to do to protect his reputation. Evelyn felt a chill. Linda continued reading. Not mistake silence for innocence. People can be manipulated. People can be afraid. But when fear becomes more important than truth, good people can help bad things continue. Linda stopped. Her voice broke. I never wanted to hurt you, Evelyn. Evelyn looked at her. Then tell me the truth. Linda nodded. I will. She placed the letter down. When James discovered the financial records, he didn't immediately accuse Matthew. James believed everyone deserved a chance to explain themselves. Almost smiled. That sounded like him. James always looked for the good in people even when it hurt him. He approached Matthew privately, Linda continued. And at first Matthew denied everything. Linda looked nervous. Then he changed. Stopped acting like a pastor. Listened carefully. He told James that some things were bigger than one person. What does that mean? Linda swallowed. He said the church had survived because people knew how to protect it. Evelyn frowned. Protect it? Yes, by hiding the truth, Linda nodded. That was when James realized Matthew wasn't planning to fix the problem. He was planning to cover it. Linda looked away. And that's when I made my biggest mistake. What did you do? Linda's voice became almost a whisper. I helped him. Evelyn closed her eyes. Because Matthew convinced me that if the truth came out, thousands of people would lose their faith. She shook her head. I thought I was protecting God's work. Now, Linda looked at her. Now I realize I was protecting a person. The word stayed with Evelyn because she understood she had done the same thing for years. She had trusted Pastor Matthew because he represented something holy. But maybe she had confused the messenger with the message. Where is the rest of the evidence? Evelyn asked. Linda became quiet. There is more. Yes. Much more? I don't know. Linda, she looked down. James gave copies to someone else. Who? Linda hesitated, then said, someone Matthew would never suspect. Who? Linda reached into another drawer. She removed an old photograph. Evelyn picked it up. It showed James standing beside three people. One of them was Thomas Reed. The second was Linda. The third person made Evelyn's heart stop because she knew him. Was Pastor Matthew's own brother. Evelyn looked at Linda. What does he have to do with this? Linda whispered. He was the first person James went to after discovering everything. Why? Linda's eyes filled with fear. Because James believed Matthew's brother was the only person who could stop him. Stared at the photograph. Then Linda said the words that changed everything. Evelyn. Matthew's brother disappeared 2 weeks after James died. The room went completely silent. And suddenly, Evelyn realized something. The secret James died trying to expose was much bigger than missing money. It was a secret someone had spent 12 years trying to bury. Evelyn did not speak for several minutes. She simply stared at the photograph in her hands. James, Thomas Reed, Linda, and a man she had seen standing beside Pastor Matthew countless times, Daniel Matthew, Pastor Matthew's younger brother, the man everyone in the church described as quiet, humble, and faithful, the man who handled the church's community outreach programs, the man who disappeared 12 years ago. Evelyn slowly placed the photograph on the table. Linda. Her voice was barely above a whisper. What happened to Daniel? Linda looked down. I don't know. You don't know. I know what people were told. What were they told? Linda took a deep breath. Pastor Matthew told everyone Daniel moved away. Evelyn frowned. Just like that? Yes. Working at the church for years. Yes. Anyone question it? Linda gave a sad smile. People question it privately, not publicly. Linda shook her head. People trusted Matthew. The words hurt because Evelyn knew they were true. She had trusted him too. For years, Pastor Matthew wasn't just a pastor. He was the person people went to when they were broken, when marriages were failing, when loved ones were sick, when grief became too heavy. He stood beside hospital beds. He prayed at funerals. He baptized children. And that was why the betrayal felt so painful, because he had built his entire life around being someone people could trust. Evelyn looked at James's letter again. The money was only the beginning. She repeated the words. What did James find? Linda hesitated. I don't know everything. But you know something. Linda nodded slowly. James believed the money was being used to control people. Looked confused. Control people? Yes. How? Linda folded her hands together. Think about everyone who questioned Matthew. Thought back Thomas Reed, the families who never received assistance, the members who quietly stopped attending, people who disappeared from church leadership. They were pushed away. Linda nodded. Anyone who threatened his image became a problem. Felt a cold feeling move through her. The money wasn't just stolen. No, it was used to build power. Linda looked at her. Yes. For the first time, Evelyn understood the size of what James had discovered. This wasn't just about missing donations. It was about a man who had convinced people that protecting him was the same as protecting God. Evelyn stood. I need to find Daniel. Linda looked frightened. Evelyn. What? Be careful. If Matthew knows James's letters have been found. Linda stopped. Evelyn finished the sentence. He will know someone is coming after him. Linda nodded. That evening, Evelyn sat alone in James's old chair, the same chair where she had prayed every morning, the same chair where she had asked God for strength. But this time her prayer was different. Lord, she closed her eyes. Give me wisdom. She paused. Anger. A tear rolled down her cheek. Help me do what is right. The next morning, Evelyn began searching. She looked through old church records, public documents, news articles, anything connected to Daniel Matthew. For hours, nothing appeared. Then she found something. An old newspaper article from 12 years earlier. The headline read, Local community volunteer missing after church dispute. Evelyn's heart started racing. She opened the article. Daniel Matthew had disappeared 3 days after resigning from New Hope Community Church. The article mentioned an argument with church leadership, but there was one detail that caught Evelyn's attention. A witness had reported seeing Daniel leave the church office late at night carrying a box of documents. Evelyn immediately thought of James and the hidden files. Then she saw something else. The article included a photograph of Daniel standing outside the church. Behind him was Pastor Matthew watching him. Evelyn stared at the image. Something about it felt wrong. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. For a moment she considered ignoring it, but something inside her told her to answer. Hello? No response, only silence. Then a man's voice finally spoke. Mrs. Brooks. Evelyn froze. No, you found James's letters. Her heart stopped. Who is this? The man breathed heavily. Name is Daniel Matthew. Evelyn stood up. You're alive? Yes. Silence that followed felt impossible. Where have you been? Daniel's voice became quiet. Hiding. Who? A pause. Then he answered, from my brother. Gripped the phone. Daniel, I need to know the truth. You do. James come to you? Yes. What did he tell you? Daniel was silent. Then he said, James discovered something that was never supposed to be found. Evelyn's heart raced. What? Daniel whispered. The church was never the only thing Matthew was protecting. Else. Another pause. Then Daniel said, he was protecting himself. Looked toward James's photograph. After 12 years. She was finally hearing the truth from the person who had disappeared. But before she could ask another question, Daniel said something that made her blood run cold. Mrs. Brooks, you need to leave town. If Matthew knows I contacted you, his voice shook. We'll come after you the same way he came after James. The call ended. Evelyn stood frozen. The secret James died trying to expose was no longer buried. But now the person who had hidden it for 12 years knew Evelyn had found it. And this time, she was the one standing in his way. Evelyn did not move for several minutes after the call ended. The phone was still in her hand. The room was completely silent, but her mind was louder than ever. He will come after you the same way he came after James. Those words repeated again and again. She looked toward the photograph on the table. James was smiling. The same smile she remembered from 31 years of marriage. The same smile that had convinced her everything would be okay, even when life was falling apart. But now, for the first time, Evelyn wondered something she never allowed herself to consider. How much danger had James been in during those final weeks? How much had he carried alone because he wanted to protect her? A tear rolled down her cheek. I'm sorry, James. Her voice trembled. I should have known something was wrong. But deep inside, another thought came. Maybe she wasn't supposed to know then. Maybe James had waited because he knew the truth had to be uncovered at the right time. Evelyn wiped her tears. Fear was there. But something stronger was growing. Determination. She picked up James's letter again. She read every line carefully. Then she noticed something she had missed before. At the bottom of the page, underneath James's signature, there was a small handwritten note, 3 words. Check the foundation. Evelyn frowned. The foundation. She grabbed the other documents, bank statements, church records, donation reports. She searched through everything James had left behind, then she found it. A payment, not a donation, not a ministry expense, a property transaction. The church had purchased a building several years earlier. The official record said it was for a community center, but James had circled something. The seller's name. Evelyn leaned closer. The property had not been purchased from a stranger. It had been purchased from a company connected to Matthew's family. Her heart sank. "Many things did you find, James?" she whispered. The phone rang again. Evelyn froze. This time she knew the number. "Linda," she answered immediately. "Linda," her friend's voice sounded shaken. "Evelyn, where are you?" "At home." "You need to be careful." Evelyn stood. "What happened?" "I went back to the church." Evelyn's expression changed. "Why?" "I needed to look for something." "Linda, you promised me you would be careful." "I know." Her voice cracked. "I found something." Gripped the phone. "What?" "Matthew knows." The room went cold. "How?" "I don't know." Linda paused. "But someone went through my office." Evelyn's heart raced. "Was anything taken?" "No." "Then what happened?" Linda hesitated. "They left something." Felt uneasy. "What?" Linda lowered her voice. "A copy of James's letter." Evelyn stopped breathing. "What?" "They placed it on my desk." "Why?" Linda answered quietly. "To let me know they know." A cold feeling moved through Evelyn. Matthew wasn't hiding anymore. He was sending a message. "Linda, leave the church." "I can't." "Why?" "Because there is something else you need to know." Waited. Daniel wasn't the only person who disappeared. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "Another person left after questioning Matthew." "Who?" Linda took a deep breath. "The church accountant before Thomas." Evelyn sat down slowly. "Many people." "I don't know." "Linda, I think James was trying to find a pattern." Looked at the papers scattered across the table, and suddenly everything connected. Thomas was removed, Daniel disappeared, the accountant left, people who questioned Matthew were gone, and every time the church moved on as if nothing happened. Evelyn whispered, "He wasn't protecting the church." "No." Linda's voice was barely audible. "He was protecting himself." That evening, Evelyn made a decision. She could no longer investigate alone. She needed someone outside the church, someone who couldn't be pressured, someone who would follow the evidence. She opened her phone and searched for a name. A former detective who had worked financial crimes. Detective Sarah Mitchell. The next morning, Evelyn sat across from Sarah at a quiet cafe. She placed James's documents on the table. Sarah looked through them carefully. For almost 20 minutes she said nothing. Finally she looked up. "Mrs. Brooks." "Yes." "Your husband was not just collecting evidence." Leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Sarah tapped the papers. "He was building a case." Evelyn felt her heart beat faster. "A case against Matthew," Sarah nodded. "He was missing one important thing. That the money trail connected directly to him." Looked down. "Can we find it?" Sarah closed the folder. "If James was as careful as you describe," she paused, "then he probably left something behind." Remembered the note, checked the foundation, and suddenly she knew the answer was somewhere, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to look. But before they could leave, Sarah's phone rang. She answered. Her expression changed immediately. "What?" She listened, then looked at Evelyn. "Mrs. Brooks." Evelyn stood. "What happened?" Sarah slowly lowered the phone. "Someone broke into your house." Evelyn's face went pale. "What did they take?" Sarah looked directly at her. "Nothing. Nothing." "No." A pause. "They weren't looking for valuables." Evelyn felt her stomach tighten. "Then what were they looking for?" Sarah's voice became quiet. "James's letters." Evelyn stared ahead. The truth had been hidden for 12 years, but now someone was desperate enough to destroy it. And Evelyn finally understood. She wasn't just uncovering the past. She was challenging someone who had spent years making sure the past stayed buried. Evelyn barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the same things. James sitting across from her at the kitchen table. The letters hidden for 12 years. Daniel disappearing without explanation. And now someone breaking into her home searching for the truth. But the thing that frightened Evelyn the most was not the break-in. It was the realization that James had known. He had known something was wrong. He had known people were being hurt. And he had spent his final days trying to leave behind a path that would eventually lead someone to the truth. At 6 in the morning, Evelyn was already sitting at her dining table. The documents were spread everywhere: property records, church financial statements, donation reports, James's handwritten notes. Detective Sarah Mitchell arrived shortly after she placed a folder on the table. I checked the property records again, looked up, and Sarah opened the folder. The building purchase was approved by the church board 13 years ago. Evelyn nodded. That was around the time James started investigating. Sarah pointed to the documents. But there is something interesting. Evelyn leaned closer. The church did not buy the property directly, her eyebrows tightened. What do you mean? The money came from the church. Sarah paused, but the ownership was transferred through a separate company first. Felt her stomach tight. Covenant Community Outreach, Sarah nodded. The same organization James discovered. Filled the room, the same name, the same pattern, the same secret. Evelyn looked down at James's note, checked the foundation. He knew, she whispered. Sarah looked at her. Who? James. She touched the paper gently. He wasn't talking about the building. What was he talking about? Evelyn looked at the records, the foundation. She paused. The foundation of everything Matthew built. Sarah understood. This wasn't just about one transaction. No, Evelyn looked at the documents. It was about the entire structure. They continued searching for hours. They followed every payment, every company, every name. Then Sarah stopped. Wait, looked up. What? Sarah turned the laptop toward her. There is another company connected to the property. Evelyn leaned forward. What company? Sarah pointed at the screen. Matthew Family Holdings. Evelyn froze. Matthew's family? Yes. The room became quiet. The church had purchased a community center from a company connected to the pastor's own family. But that was not the worst part. Sarah clicked another document. Look at the date. Evelyn stared. The property was sold to the church 3 months after Matthew became senior pastor. Her heart sank. He approved the purchase. Sarah nodded, benefited from it, looked away. For years, she had listened to Matthew preach about sacrifice, about serving others, about putting God first. But behind the scenes, he had been building something for himself. Her phone suddenly rang. Both women looked at the screen. Unknown number. Evelyn froze. Sarah reached for her hand. Don't answer if you don't want to. But Evelyn knew she needed to know. She picked up. Hello? For several seconds, there was only silence. Then a familiar voice spoke. Evelyn, her heart stopped. Pastor Matthew, I heard you have been asking questions, said nothing. You have always been a faithful woman. Her grip tightened around the phone. That's supposed to comfort me, Matthew sighed. I know you are hurting. No, Evelyn's voice became stronger. I am finally seeing clearly. A pause, then Matthew said, James would not have wanted this. Felt anger rise inside her. Don't use my husband to justify what you did. Silence. When Matthew spoke again, his voice was colder. You don't understand what you are disturbing. Looked at Sarah, then explain it. You think you are uncovering corruption. Am I wrong? Matthew didn't answer. That silence said enough. Then he said, some truths destroy more than they heal. Shook her head. Truth doesn't destroy. Her voice trembled. Lies do. Matthew became quiet. Then he asked, did Daniel contact you? Evelyn froze. Sarah immediately noticed. Matthew continued, you need to be careful who you trust. Evelyn stood. That a warning? No, a pause. It is advice. The call ended. Evelyn slowly lowered the phone. Sarah looked at her. He knows about Daniel. Nodded. He knows everything. Then Sarah noticed something on the table, a document Evelyn had not opened yet. A small envelope hidden underneath the property records. Sarah picked it up. Evelyn. She turned it over. There was handwriting on the front. Both women recognized it immediately, James. But this time, the envelope was not addressed to Evelyn. It was addressed to the person who finds the foundation. Evelyn's hands began shaking. James had left another message, not for his wife, not for Linda, for whoever finally uncovered the truth. She opened it carefully. Inside was one sentence that made both women stop breathing. Matthew was never afraid of losing money. He was afraid of losing what the money gave him. Looked at Sarah. What does that mean? Sarah stared at the letter, then slowly answered. It means the money was never the real secret. Looked toward James's photograph. And for the first time she understood. James wasn't trying to expose a thief. He was trying to expose a man who had built an entire world around a lie. Evelyn spent the entire night staring at James's final message, not because she didn't understand the words, but because she finally understood the weight behind them. James wasn't chasing money. He wasn't trying to destroy Pastor Matthew's reputation. He wasn't looking for revenge. He was trying to expose something much deeper, a system. A carefully built world where influence, trust, and fear were all connected. A world where people protected a man because they believed protecting him meant protecting their faith. Evelyn looked at James's photograph on the shelf. "You knew, didn't you?" Her voice broke. "You knew people would have a hard time believing this." She picked up the letter again. For years, she had wondered why James became quieter near the end of his life, why he spent so much time writing, why he started keeping copies of documents, why he would suddenly stop talking whenever Pastor Matthew's name came up. She thought it was because he was tired, because he was afraid of dying. But now she knew James wasn't afraid of death. He was afraid the truth would die with him. The next morning, Evelyn met with Sarah again. This time they were not looking for clues, they were looking for Daniel, the one person who knew what happened after James uncovered everything. Sarah placed a folder on the table. "I found something." Looked up. "About Daniel," Sarah nodded. "After he disappeared, he changed his name." Evelyn leaned forward. "Why?" "To protect himself. From his own brother." Sarah didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "That is what we need to find out." The folder were old records, different addresses, different jobs, different cities. Daniel had spent 12 years moving from place to place, never staying anywhere too long. Evelyn looked at the documents. He was running. "Yes, people don't run for no reason." Sarah nodded. "They don't." Then Sarah pointed at one record. "This is interesting." Looked closer. A small town, a community center, a volunteer position. He was helping people. Sarah nodded. Everywhere he went. Felt something change. Despite everything that happened, Daniel hadn't disappeared because he was guilty. He disappeared because he was afraid. And still, he spent years helping others. "Find him," Evelyn said. Sarah looked at her. "We will." 2 days later, Sarah received a call. She didn't say much, but Evelyn could tell from her face they had found him. Daniel Matthew was living in a small town 3 hours away, working quietly, keeping his past hidden. Evelyn and Sarah drove there the next morning. The entire journey was filled with silence. Evelyn thought about what she would say. How do you speak to the brother of the man who betrayed you? How do you ask someone why they disappeared when your husband died trying to reveal the truth? When they arrived, Daniel was standing outside a small community building. He looked older than Evelyn expected, tired but peaceful. When he saw Evelyn, his expression changed. "Mrs. Brooks." Evelyn stopped. "You knew I would find you." Daniel looked away. A pause. "I hoped someone would." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Evelyn walked closer. "Husband trusted you." Daniel's eyes filled with emotion. "I know. He died believing the truth mattered." Swallowed. "He was one of the bravest men I ever knew." Evelyn fought back tears. "Then why did you disappear?" Daniel looked toward the building behind him. "Because I saw what happened when people challenged my brother." Evelyn waited. Daniel took a deep breath. "James came to me because he believed I could stop Matthew." "Could you?" Daniel looked down. Answer was painful. "I tried." He explained everything. After James discovered the financial records, he went to Daniel privately. At first, Daniel couldn't believe it. He defended his brother because Matthew wasn't just his brother. He was someone Daniel admired, someone he believed was doing God's work. But then James showed him the evidence, the hidden companies, the property transfers, the missing funds, and one document that changed everything. A list, names of people who had been pushed away after questioning Matthew. Thomas Reed, the former accountant, church members, volunteers, people who had simply asked questions. Daniel looked at Evelyn. "My brother wasn't afraid of losing money." Evelyn froze, the same words James had written. "He was afraid of losing control." The room became quiet. "After I confronted him, he told me something I will never forget." "What?" Daniel's voice lowered. He said, "People don't follow the truth. They follow whoever makes them feel safe." Evelyn felt a chill. Matthew had confused loyalty with faith, trust with obedience, and leadership with control. "What happened after that?" Evelyn asked. Daniel looked away. "He found out I had copies of the evidence." Evelyn's heart raced. "What did he do?" "He threatened me." "What?" Daniel looked at her. "With destroying my name." A pause. "He told me nobody would believe his own brother accusing him." Evelyn understood that was Matthew's greatest weapon, not money, not power, trust. Daniel continued. "I left because I knew if I stayed, he would make me look like the enemy." Looked down. "And James," Daniel's face changed. "James tried to expose him anyway." A tear rolled down Daniel's cheek. "He told me something before he went back to the hospital." held her breath. "What?" Daniel looked directly at her. He said, "If they have to choose between protecting a person and protecting the truth, I pray they choose the truth." Evelyn closed her eyes. That sounded exactly like James. Evelyn looked at him. "What does it prove?" Daniel took a deep breath. "It proves Matthew knew." The words hung in the room. He knew about the companies. He knew about the transfers. He knew where the money was going. Looked down, and he still continued. Nodded. Yes. For years, Evelyn had tried to understand how someone who preached compassion could hurt so many people, how someone who prayed with the broken could secretly take advantage of them. But now she understood. Matthew had not convinced himself he was doing something wrong. He had convinced himself he was doing something necessary. And that was what made him dangerous. Sarah gathered the documents carefully. "We need to preserve everything." Looked at her. "What happens now?" Sarah hesitated. "Now we build a complete case." Looked surprised. "A case?" Sarah nodded. "Matthew will not admit anything because he believes people will protect him." She looked at Evelyn. "We need more than one document." Evelyn understood. One piece of evidence could be questioned. One witness could be attacked. But a pattern was harder to destroy. Over the next several days, they searched through everything James had collected. They found more names, more transactions, more connections. And slowly the picture became clearer. The widows who never received assistance. The families who were promised help but received nothing. The volunteers who disappeared after asking questions. The leaders who suddenly resigned. It was never random. Every person who challenged Matthew lost something. Their position, their reputation, their voice. Evelyn sat quietly as Sarah organized the files. He made people afraid to speak. Sarah nodded. Everyone thought they were protecting the church. Yes. Looked at James's photograph. He knew. Looked at her. He always believed people would eventually choose truth. A small tear formed in Evelyn's eyes. He believed better of people than they believed of themselves. That evening, Evelyn returned to New Hope Community Church for the first time since everything began. She didn't go inside. She simply sat in her car across the street. The building looked the same doors, the same windows, the same place where she had prayed for 12 years. But it felt different now. Because she finally saw what James saw. A building could be holy, but people inside it could still make mistakes. A position could be respected, but the person holding it still had a responsibility to be honest. Her phone rang. Sarah. Evelyn answered. "Sarah," her voice sounded urgent. "Evelyn, we found something else." Evelyn sat up. "What?" "There was one account we couldn't trace." "Account?" "The original New Covenant Community Outreach account." Evelyn frowned. "Why?" "Because it was closed 12 years ago." "When?" Sarah paused. 3 days after James died. Felt her heart stop. 3 days, the same week everything changed. The same week Daniel disappeared. The same week Thomas lost his position. Sarah continued. "That's not the biggest problem." Gripped the phone. "What is?" "The final transaction before the account closed." "Where did the money go?" Sarah took a breath. "Into a private account." Evelyn's stomach tightened. "Whose account?" Sarah's answer came slowly. "Pastor Matthew's." The world seemed to go quiet. After 12 years of searching. After years of hiding. After every lie and every excuse. The final piece had finally appeared. Matthew had spent 12 years convincing everyone the truth was complicated. But now Evelyn knew. It wasn't complicated. It was buried. And buried things could always be uncovered. She looked at James's photograph. For the first time in 12 years, she smiled through her tears. "You did it, James." The truth survived. But then Sarah said something that changed everything. "Evelyn." "Yes." "Matthew knows we have the documents." A silence followed. "How?" Sarah's voice lowered. "Because someone inside the church contacted him." Evelyn froze. Someone inside. Someone who knew what they were doing. Someone close enough to see everything. And then one name came to her mind. A name she never wanted to hear again. Linda. Evelyn did not want to believe Linda had betrayed her again, not after everything. Not after Linda had cried at her kitchen table. Not after she admitted helping Matthew hide the truth 12 years earlier. Not after promising that this time she would make things right. Evelyn gripped the phone. "Are you sure it was Linda?" Sarah became quiet. "I didn't say it was Linda." Evelyn froze. "What?" "I said someone inside the church contacted Matthew." Slowly sat down. "Then who?" "We don't know yet." For several seconds, Evelyn said nothing. She realized how quickly suspicion had entered her heart. Linda had betrayed her once, so Evelyn had immediately assumed she would do it again. She closed her eyes. "I'm sorry." "What?" "For deciding someone was guilty before I knew the truth." Sarah's voice softened. "That's exactly why we're following evidence instead of fear." The word stayed with Evelyn, because after everything Matthew had done, Evelyn refused to become like him. She would not manipulate. She would not accuse without proof. She would not destroy someone simply because she was angry. She wanted truth, nothing more, nothing less. The following morning, Linda called. "Evelyn, Matthew wants to see you." Evelyn sat upright. "Why?" "He knows you have something." Looked toward James's documents. "How much does he know?" "I don't know." "Linda, did you tell him?" Silence. Evelyn's heart sank. "Linda, no." Answer came through tears. "I swear to you, Evelyn, I didn't tell him." Evelyn closed her eyes. For once she chose not to let suspicion answer for her. "Then someone else did." "Yes." Linda lowered her voice. "Matthew is frightened." That surprised Evelyn. For 12 years, Pastor Matthew had controlled every room he entered. People listened when he spoke. People trusted when he promised. People became silent when he warned them. But now he was afraid. "There's an emergency church meeting Sunday evening," Linda continued. "He called it." "Yes." "Why?" "He says there are people spreading lies about the ministry." Almost laughed, of course. Matthew was preparing the congregation before Evelyn could speak. He was doing what he had always done, controlling the story. But this time, James had left behind something stronger than Matthew's words: evidence. Sunday evening arrived. New Hope Community Church was packed. People filled the sanctuary. Some had heard rumors, others knew nothing. Pastor Matthew stood behind the pulpit, Bible open, suit immaculate, voice calm. He looked exactly like the man Evelyn had trusted for 12 years. And for a moment, seeing him there hurt. She remembered the hospital, James lying weak in bed, Matthew praying beside him. She remembered the funeral, Matthew promising she would never walk alone. She remembered every sermon that had carried her through grief. Not every moment had been fake. And perhaps that was what made betrayal so painful. Sometimes the person who hurts you has also helped you. One truth does not erase the other. Matthew raised his hands. "Brothers and sisters, our church is under attack." Murmurs moved through the sanctuary. "There are accusations being made against this ministry and against me personally." Evelyn sat quietly near the back. Sarah was several rows away. Linda sat on the opposite side. And then Evelyn saw someone standing near the rear doors, Daniel. Matthew hadn't noticed him yet. Matthew continued. "The enemy has always tried to divide God's people." Evelyn's expression changed. There it was again. Questioning Matthew was being presented as questioning God. Matthew looked across the congregation. "Some people have allowed bitterness, grief, and confusion to become weapons against this church." Evelyn knew he was talking about her. Then Matthew saw her. Their eyes met. The sanctuary became painfully still. "Sister Evelyn." Matthew's voice softened. "Perhaps you would like to say something." Head turned. Evelyn's heart pounded. For 12 years, she had sat in that church believing faith meant remaining quiet when she didn't understand. But James had taught her something different. Faith was not fear of questions. Faith did not require protecting lies. And truth did not become sinful simply because it made powerful people uncomfortable. Evelyn stood. She carried no stack of documents, no dramatic folder, only James's letter and her Bible. "I do have something to say." Matthew watched her. Evelyn walked slowly toward the front. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. 12 years ago, my husband discovered money missing from this church." Murmurs spread through the sanctuary. Matthew immediately interrupted. "Evelyn, grief can make us remember things. Please." She looked directly at him. "You've spoken for 12 years. The church became silent. Me speak for 5 minutes." Matthew's face tightened. Evelyn turned toward the congregation. She told them about James, the unexplained transfers, New Covenant community outreach, the property transactions, the families whose names had been used to raise money, Clara Jenkins, The widows who received nothing, Thomas Reed. The people pushed out after asking questions. Then she told them about the private account. Matthew stood. This is ridiculous. Sarah rose from her seat. Pastor Matthew. Everyone turned. Sarah held up a folder. We have the financial records. Stared at her. And who exactly are you? Someone who followed the money. The room erupted in whispers. Then Linda stood. I signed some of those documents. Looked at her. Linda was crying. I told myself I was protecting this church. Her voice shook. I wasn't. She looked toward Matthew. I was protecting you. Matthew's face changed. Linda, sit down. For 12 years, Linda had obeyed that voice. This time she didn't know one word, but Evelyn could see what it cost her. Linda turned toward the congregation. I helped hide questions that should have been answered. I stayed silent because I was afraid people would lose faith. She wiped her tears. God does not need lies to protect him. The sanctuary went completely quiet. Matthew stepped away from the pulpit. You people have no idea what you're doing. Then another voice came from the back. I do. Matthew froze. Evelyn turned. Daniel began walking down the aisle. Gasps moved through the congregation. Several older members recognized him immediately. Matthew's face went pale. Daniel, his brother, stopped several feet away. For 12 years you let these people believe I abandoned them. Stared at him. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Held up the document James had preserved. You signed it. Matthew's eyes dropped to the page. For the first time that evening, he had no immediate answer. Daniel continued. James gave me this because he knew one day you would deny everything. Matthew looked toward Evelyn, then Linda, then Sarah, then his brother. Then Daniel reached into his bag. He pulled out a small envelope. I kept this for 12 years. Evelyn stared. What is it? Daniel handed it to her. The final piece James gave me. Sarah looked surprised. Why didn't you reveal this before? Daniel answered. Because I was waiting for the right person to find it. Slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a single page, but at the bottom was something that made her heart stop. A signature, not James's, not Daniel's, Pastor Matthew's. Daniel watched her expression change. What is it? Evelyn looked up. Her voice was barely a whisper. She looked back at the document. For 12 years, everyone believed James died with unanswered questions. But he didn't. He left a trail, a path. And now Evelyn finally had the one thing Matthew feared most, evidence he could not explain away. Evelyn held the document in her hands for several minutes. She didn't read it again. She didn't need to. The signature at the bottom had already changed everything. Pastor Matthew, not a rumor, not a suspicion, not another unanswered question. A signature, a decision he had personally approved, a connection he could no longer deny. Sarah slowly leaned closer. Evelyn, what exactly is that? Evelyn looked at Daniel. Her voice was quiet. Matthew signed it, closed his eyes. For 12 years, he had carried the weight of knowing the truth existed. But now someone else finally saw it. Sarah carefully took the document. She examined every detail, the date, the signature, the information written above it. Then she looked up. This changes everything. Evelyn swallowed. What is it? Sarah placed the paper on the table. This is not just a financial record. She pointed to the signature. This is authorization. Nodded slowly. That was why James kept it. Evelyn looked at him. What does it prove? Daniel took a deep breath. It proves Matthew knew. The words hung in the room. He knew about the companies. He knew about the transfers. He knew where the money was going. Looked down, and he still continued. Nodded. Yes. For years, Evelyn had tried to understand how someone who preached compassion could hurt so many people. How someone who prayed with the broken could secretly take advantage of them. But now she understood. Matthew had not convinced himself he was doing something wrong. He had convinced himself he was doing something necessary. And that was what made him dangerous. Sarah gathered the documents carefully. We need to preserve everything. Looked at her. What happens now? Sarah hesitated. Now we build a complete case. Looked surprised. A case? Sarah nodded. Matthew will not admit anything because he believes people will protect him. She looked at Evelyn. We need more than one document. Evelyn understood. One piece of evidence could be questioned. One witness could be attacked, but a pattern was harder to destroy. Over the next several days, they searched through everything James had collected. They found more names, more transactions, more connections, and slowly the picture became clearer. The widows who never received assistance, the families who were promised help but received nothing, the volunteers who disappeared after asking questions, the leaders who suddenly resigned. It was never random. Every person who challenged Matthew lost something. Their position, their reputation, their voice. Evelyn sat quietly as Sarah organized the files. He made people afraid to speak. Sarah nodded. Everyone thought they were protecting the church. Yes, looked at James's photograph. He knew, looked at her. He always believed people would eventually choose truth. A small tear formed in Evelyn's eyes. He believed better of people than they believed of themselves. That evening, Evelyn returned to New Hope Community Church for the first time since everything began. She didn't go inside. She simply sat in her car across the street. The building looked the same doors, the same windows, the same place where she had prayed for 12 years. But it felt different now, because she finally saw what James saw. A building could be holy, but people inside it could still make mistakes. A position could be respected, but the person holding it still had a responsibility to be honest. Her phone rang. Sarah. Evelyn answered. Sarah, her voice sounded urgent. Evelyn, we found something else. Evelyn sat up. What? There was one account we couldn't trace. Account? The original New Covenant Community Outreach account. Evelyn frowned. Why? Because it was closed 12 years ago. When? Sarah paused. 3 days after James died. Felt her heart stop. 3 days, the same week everything changed. The same week Daniel disappeared. The same week Thomas lost his position. Sarah continued. That's not the biggest problem. Gripped the phone. What is? The final transaction before the account closed. Where did the money go? Sarah took a breath. Into a private account. Evelyn's stomach tightened. Whose account? Sarah's answer came slowly. Pastor Matthew's. The world seemed to go quiet. After 12 years of searching. After years of hiding. After every lie and every excuse. The final piece had finally appeared. Matthew had spent 12 years convincing everyone the truth was complicated. But now Evelyn knew. It wasn't complicated. It was buried. And buried things could always be uncovered. She looked at James's photograph. For the first time in 12 years, she smiled through her tears. You did it, James. The truth survived. But then Sarah said something that changed everything. Evelyn. Yes. Matthew knows we have the documents. A silence followed. How? Sarah's voice lowered. Because someone inside the church contacted him. Evelyn froze. Someone inside. Someone who knew what they were doing. Someone close enough to see everything. And then one name came to her mind. A name she never wanted to hear again. Linda. Evelyn did not want to believe Linda had betrayed her again, not after everything. Not after Linda had cried at her kitchen table. Not after she admitted helping Matthew hide the truth 12 years earlier. Not after promising that this time she would make things right. Evelyn gripped the phone. Are you sure it was Linda? Sarah became quiet. I didn't say it was Linda. Evelyn froze. What? I said someone inside the church contacted Matthew. Slowly sat down. Then who? We don't know yet. For several seconds, Evelyn said nothing. She realized how quickly suspicion had entered her heart. Linda had betrayed her once, so Evelyn had immediately assumed she would do it again. She closed her eyes. I'm sorry. What? For deciding someone was guilty before I knew the truth. Sarah's voice softened. That's exactly why we're following evidence instead of fear. The word stayed with Evelyn, because after everything Matthew had done, Evelyn refused to become like him. She would not manipulate. She would not accuse without proof. She would not destroy someone simply because she was angry. She wanted truth, nothing more, nothing less. The following morning, Linda called. Evelyn, Matthew wants to see you. Evelyn sat upright. Why? He knows you have something. Looked toward James's documents. How much does he know? I don't know. Linda, did you tell him? Silence. Evelyn's heart sank. Linda, no. Answer came through tears. I swear to you, Evelyn, I didn't tell him. Evelyn closed her eyes. For once she chose not to let suspicion answer for her. Then someone else did. Yes. Linda lowered her voice. Matthew is frightened. That surprised Evelyn. For 12 years, Pastor Matthew had controlled every room he entered. People listened when he spoke. People trusted when he promised. People became silent when he warned them, but now he was afraid. "There's an emergency church meeting Sunday evening," Linda continued. He called it. "Yes. Why?" "He says there are people spreading lies about the ministry." Almost laughed, of course. Matthew was preparing the congregation before Evelyn could speak. He was doing what he had always done, controlling the story. But this time, James had left behind something stronger than Matthew's words: evidence. Sunday evening arrived. New Hope Community Church was packed. People filled the sanctuary. Some had heard rumors, others knew nothing. Pastor Matthew stood behind the pulpit, Bible open, suit immaculate, voice calm. He looked exactly like the man Evelyn had trusted for 12 years. And for a moment, seeing him there hurt. She remembered the hospital, James lying weak in bed, Matthew praying beside him. She remembered the funeral, Matthew promising she would never walk alone. She remembered every sermon that had carried her through grief. Not every moment had been fake. And perhaps that was what made betrayal so painful. Sometimes the person who hurts you has also helped you. One truth does not erase the other. Matthew raised his hands. "Brothers and sisters, our church is under attack." Murmurs moved through the sanctuary. "There are accusations being made against this ministry and against me personally." Evelyn sat quietly near the back. Sarah was several rows away. Linda sat on the opposite side, and then Evelyn saw someone standing near the rear doors, Daniel. Matthew hadn't noticed him yet. Matthew continued. "The enemy has always tried to divide God's people." Evelyn's expression changed. There it was again. A tear fell onto the open Bible. "But at the time you knew I was ready." She paused. "Help me forgive without pretending nothing happened." Pause. "Help this church heal without hiding what hurt us." Then Evelyn whispered the prayer she had prayed every morning after James died. "Lord, help me make it through today." This time she smiled, because those words no longer came from desperation. They came from faith. Evelyn stood and walked slowly toward the doors. Before leaving, she looked back at the sanctuary. 12 years earlier, Pastor Matthew had stood behind that pulpit at James's funeral and promised Evelyn she would never walk alone. He had been right about one thing: she hadn't. But it was never Matthew who had carried her. And as Evelyn stepped into the morning sunlight with James's Bible pressed against her heart, she finally understood what her husband had spent his final days trying to protect. Not money, not a church's reputation, not his own name, truth. Because faith that requires a lie to survive was never faith at all. And sometimes the answer to prayer isn't God keeping the truth from hurting you. Sometimes the answer is God giving you the strength to face it. Evelyn spent 12 years believing that questioning a spiritual leader meant questioning God. But in the end, she learned that true faith does not fear the truth. If this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments. Could you forgive Linda after everything she did? And if you believe that truth, prayer, and faith can carry us through even the deepest betrayal, subscribe for more powerful stories of faith, family, and redemption. Until the next story, remember, sometimes God doesn't remove the storm. Sometimes He gives you the strength to walk through it.